Picture this. It's the first day of November, 1396. Inside St. Paul's Cathedral in London, hundreds of flickering candles cast dancing shadows against towering Gothic windows. The deep, resonant tones of the organ fill every corner of the sacred space as footsteps echo down the central aisle. But this isn't just any wedding ceremony you're witnessing. A tiny figure moves slowly toward the altar, her golden silk dress so heavy it drags across the cold stone floor. This is Isabelle of France, just 6 years old, struggling under the weight of a miniature crown that seems far too grand for her small head. At the altar waits Richard II, King of England, a man of 29, watching as Europe's youngest princess approaches to become his bride. In just moments, this little girl will be declared Queen of England, sealing a political agreement that will reshape the destinies of two powerful nations. But how did such a young child become the centerpiece of medieval politics at its most ruthless? If you're curious about these incredible historical stories that most people never hear about, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of history lovers from around the world. To understand Isabelle's heartbreaking story, we need to travel back to 14th century France, where the kingdom lived under the dark shadow of royal madness. Isabelle entered the world on November 9, 1389, within the walls of the Louvre Palace. Her parents were Charles VI of France and Isabelle of Bavaria. She was their fourth daughter, born into what you could only describe as deeply troubled times that would cast a shadow over her entire existence. Her father, Charles VI, had earned the grim nickname Charles the Mad due to terrifying episodes of insanity that had plagued him since he was 24 years old. During these frightening episodes, the King of France would fail to recognize his own wife and children. He believed his body was made of glass and would shatter if anyone dared to touch him. Palace servants would find him running through the corridors, screaming that invisible enemies were chasing him through the halls. Can you imagine growing up in such chaos? France was essentially being governed by regents who constantly fought each other for power, while the rightful king remained trapped within his own tormented mind. Isabelle's mother, Isabelle of Bavaria, presented her own set of problems. She was an ambitious and calculating woman who saw her husband's illness as an opportunity to grab power and accumulate wealth for herself. The court chroniclers of that time didn't mince words when describing her. They called her dissolute, claiming she kept multiple lovers while completely neglecting her children. For Isabelle of Bavaria, her daughters weren't beloved children to be cherished and protected. They were valuable assets in the complex game of European politics, destined to be traded away in arranged marriages that would secure alliances between kingdoms. Little Isabelle grew up surrounded by this toxic atmosphere of palace intrigue and political instability. France was being torn apart from multiple directions. The 100 Years' War against England raged on. Internal conflicts between the Armagnacs and Burgundians created chaos, and the consequences of her father's madness rippled through every aspect of royal life. For a sensitive child, witnessing her father's terrifying episodes and experiencing her mother's cold, calculating indifference created deep psychological wounds that would follow her throughout her short life. Then, in 1396, when Isabelle had barely reached her 6th birthday, a diplomatic opportunity arose that would completely alter the course of her destiny. Richard II of England, after years of costly warfare against France, desperately needed peace to strengthen his grip on internal power. He had recently lost his beloved first wife, Anne of Bohemia, and urgently needed a new marriage alliance that could bring both political stability and financial relief to his struggling kingdom. The French royal counselors, led by the powerful Duke of Berry, saw this English request as a golden opportunity they simply couldn't pass up. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this incredible story. We dive deep into the most fascinating and often overlooked tales from history that will absolutely amaze you. The French proposed a marriage between little Isabelle and King Richard, sweetening the deal with an absolutely massive dowry of £800,000 and a 28-year truce between the warring nations. For France, bankrupted by endless warfare, this represented an irresistible chance to purchase peace, even if it meant sacrificing a child. The negotiations stretched on for months, conducted with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. French and English ambassadors discussed the terms as if Isabelle were livestock being sold at a market, rather than a human child with feelings and needs. Her age became a subject of heated debate among the negotiators. Even by medieval standards, 6 years old was considered extremely young for marriage. Some English counselors argued they should wait until she reached 12, which was considered the appropriate age for consummating a marriage. But Richard II was a desperate man. He faced internal rebellions that threatened his throne, devastating financial problems that were crippling his kingdom, and the constant fear of being deposed by his enemies. French gold and external peace mattered far more to him than any concerns about his bride's tender age. By October 1396, the terms were finally settled. Isabelle of France would be handed over to England like a political gift, a child sacrificed on the altar of royal diplomacy. The farewell ceremony at the Louvre Palace was carefully orchestrated to impress the English ambassadors. Charles VI, during one of his rare moments of mental clarity, blessed his little daughter with tears streaming down his face. Isabelle of Bavaria, true to her cold nature, treated the separation like a successful business deal rather than saying goodbye to her child. Little Isabelle couldn't fully grasp what was happening to her. In her innocent mind, this journey to England seemed like an adventure, perhaps even a temporary one. She packed only a few cherished belongings, her favorite dolls and a small pet dog that had been her constant companion at the Louvre. The French entourage that accompanied Isabelle to England included hundreds of nobles, servants, and a special guard assigned to protect this precious human cargo being transported across the Channel. The journey from Calais to London stretched across several weeks and was marked by elaborate ceremonies in every English city they passed through. Local authorities competed with each other to offer the most extravagant receptions for their future queen. But little Isabelle, exhausted and intimidated by all the excessive pomp and ceremony, frequently broke down in tears and begged to go home. In London, Richard II prepared a wedding ceremony that would rival any royal event of that era. St. Paul's Cathedral was decorated with French and English fabrics woven together, symbolizing the union of the two kingdoms. Thousands of candles, specially imported from France, bathed the interior in warm light, while choirs sang in both Latin and French. This spectacular display was designed not only to impress Richard's subjects, but to demonstrate to the entire world that England had achieved peace through skillful diplomacy rather than warfare. Richard himself appeared as a reluctant but determined groom. At 29, he was considered one of the most cultured and refined men in all of Europe, a passionate lover of arts and literature. He had genuinely loved his first wife, and the prospect of marrying a small child clearly caused him great discomfort. But political necessities had to override any personal feelings or moral reservations. I'd love to know where you're watching this incredible story from. Drop a comment below and let me know your country or city. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing historical tales like this one. During the wedding ceremony, Isabelle remained completely silent, visibly overwhelmed by the grandeur and solemnity of the event. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel down to place the wedding ring on her tiny finger while she looked around desperately, searching for familiar faces that were no longer there. When she was officially declared Queen of England, she showed no signs of joy or excitement, only confusion and growing fear. Isabelle's early life at the English court was, thankfully, protected by the circumstances of her young age. Richard II, to his credit, treated her more like a beloved daughter than a wife. He provided her with French tutors so she could maintain her native language, allowed her to continue practicing her familiar customs, and ensured she was raised with all the dignity befitting royalty. The child queen received her own luxurious apartments at Westminster Palace, a beautiful manor house in the countryside, and servants devoted exclusively to her comfort and well-being. For a brief time, it seemed like little Isabelle might find some measure of happiness in her new life. But this fragile happiness was brutally shattered in September 1399, when Richard II faced a devastating rebellion led by Henry Bolingbroke. The king was deposed from his throne and subsequently murdered at Pontefract Castle. Isabelle, at just 10 years old, became a widow without ever truly having been a wife. Richard's violent death created an enormous political problem for the English. Isabelle was technically a legitimate queen, but her marriage had never been consummated, and she had produced no heirs. Even worse, the massive £800,000 dowry had already been spent on England's various needs, and returning her to France would mean somehow repaying money that no longer existed. Henry IV, England's new king, initially decided to keep Isabelle as what you might call a golden prisoner. He hoped to use her as a valuable bargaining chip in future negotiations with France. The young widow was kept in comfortable but definite captivity at Havering Castle, where she would spend 3 agonizing years fighting for her freedom. Her desperate letters to French relatives reveal a girl who had been forced to mature far too quickly through suffering and hardship. In one particularly heartbreaking letter to her father, she wrote that she was being kept like a prisoner, far from everyone she loved, without any hope of ever returning home. Her heartfelt pleas finally managed to touch Charles VI's heart during one of his moments of mental clarity. The Mad King categorically demanded his daughter's immediate return to France, threatening serious diplomatic consequences if his wishes were ignored. After lengthy and complex diplomatic negotiations, Isabelle finally returned to France in 1401, but the innocent girl who had left Paris at 6 years old had transformed into a 12-year-old who had been prematurely aged by traumatic experiences that no child should ever endure. Sadly, her return to the Louvre didn't bring the happiness and relief she had dreamed of during her captivity. France remained plunged in chaos and political turmoil, and her own family received her more as a political inconvenience than as a beloved daughter they were overjoyed to have back. But Isabelle's tragic story was far from over. In 1405, when she was 16 years old, she was once again used as political currency, when her mother arranged her second marriage to Charles of Orleans, a young French poet and nobleman. This time, however, something wonderful happened that had been denied to Isabelle throughout her childhood, a marriage based on genuine mutual affection and love. Charles of Orleans was a sensitive, intellectual man who truly fell in love with Isabelle as a person, not as a political asset. The couple discovered happiness together through their shared love of arts, poetry, and a deep romantic connection that flourished despite the political circumstances that had brought them together. For the first time in her life, Isabelle experienced what it meant to be loved for herself rather than for her value as a negotiating piece in the game of royal politics. But once again, happiness proved to be heartbreakingly short-lived. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible historical stories that reveal the human side of the past. In 1407, tragedy struck again when Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and sentenced to spend 25 long years as a prisoner in England. Isabelle found herself a widow again in practice, returned to the familiar loneliness and dependence on the French royal family. Life had cruelly stolen from her twice the precious opportunity to love and be loved in return. During the years that followed, Isabelle lived quietly at the French court, dedicating herself to charitable works and artistic pursuits. Her unique experience as England's child queen had given her invaluable insights into politics and diplomacy, knowledge she used discreetly to advise other members of the royal family when they sought her counsel. In 1409, Isabelle gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Joan of Orleans, who would grow up never knowing her father. Motherhood brought her some measure of consolation and joy, but also the bitter irony of knowing that her own daughter would probably face the exact same destiny, being used as a political instrument in arranged marriages designed to benefit others. Isabelle of France died in 1409 at just 20 years old from complications following childbirth. Her entire life had been completely dominated by other people's political needs and ambitions. She had been sacrificed at 6 in a diplomatic marriage, widowed at 10, imprisoned at 12, married again at 16 for political convenience, and became a practical widow at 18 when her second husband was captured and taken away. Her death passed almost unnoticed by the chroniclers of that time, a striking contrast to all the pomp and ceremony that had surrounded her first wedding as a child. Isabelle of France had fulfilled her designated role as a political chess piece, generating an heir and sealing alliances between kingdoms, but she never had the opportunity to simply live for herself. Isabelle's story raises profound and uncomfortable questions about the role of women in medieval politics and the terrible human cost of royal diplomacy. Her experience perfectly illustrates how children, especially girls born into nobility, were treated as transferable property between kingdoms, their entire lives subordinated to the political interests of their parents and the powerful men who ruled their world. More than 600 years after her death, Isabelle of France's tragedy continues to resonate as a somber reminder of the horrors of child marriage and the systematic objectification of children for political purposes. Her story forces us to confront some very uncomfortable truths about how entire societies can normalize the sacrifice of innocence in the name of what they consider greater interests. This child princess, who was handed over as a political gift, never truly experienced childhood. From the age of 6, she carried state responsibilities and burdens that should have belonged to adults. Her life became one continuous sacrifice to the gods of medieval politics, a price paid for temporary peace between enemy nations. Isabelle of France remains an eternal symbol of childhood vulnerability when faced with uncontrolled political power. Her memory reminds us that behind every diplomatic treaty, every royal alliance, and every political marriage throughout history, there frequently existed children whose lives were destroyed to satisfy the ambitions of the powerful. The little girl who became queen at 6 years old paid the supreme price for peace between France and England, her own happiness, her childhood, and ultimately her life. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from, and if you found this story as moving and incredible as I did, please subscribe to our channel. We're constantly uncovering these amazing human stories from history that deserve to be remembered and shared with the world. Until next time, remember that history isn't just about dates and politics. It's about real people with real emotions who lived, loved, and suffered just like we do today.